Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the table. My name is David, and I am the region pastor at Ohio Valley, and it's wonderful to be with you today. I see a lot of familiar faces from a long time ago. I am, as most people say, better looking and more seasoned. And so glad to be with you. Just a little bit before I begin, just wanted to let you know who I am and about my family. So my wife, Linda, and I have been married, I think I'm going to get this right. If not, she's going to tell me at home, 23 years. And we have 5 amazing children ranging from 21 all the way down to 8 years old. So quite a spread, and I love them dearly. Speaking of being a dad, when I became a dad, I really thought that I had things in control, right? Baby 1 is a boy. Baby 2, another boy. Baby 3, you probably guessed it. Yep, another boy. I think everything's good, no problems. I've got things under control. And that's until baby 4 is born, little girl. And I realized really quickly that I was in trouble. And that happened when she wrapped her little tiny hand around my finger and looked up at me with those blue eyes. I knew I was going to be in trouble. The boys didn't stand a chance, neither did I. And listen, it just got worse with baby number 5. Yes, you guessed it, another girl. And so here's the thing I learned, that as your children grow up, they start to do more things for themselves. That feeling of powerlessness that you have as a parent, it just grows. And it grows exponentially. You know, when they're babies, you can control the environment. But when they start to walk and talk and make decisions and make friends and go to school, and then they start driving, and suddenly you just realize how little control that you actually have. Any parents in here ever feel completely powerless? Like you love your kids more than life itself, but you can't control their choices. You can't force them to make good friends. You can't keep them away from harmful influences. You can't even make them study hard at school, right? You lie awake at night worried about their future, knowing that your love and your good intentions are just not going to be enough to protect them from what is going to happen. But here's the thing, it's not just about kids, is it? Maybe we feel powerless watching someone make destructive choices. A sibling struggling with an addiction, or a friend in an abusive relationship, or aging parents who won't accept help. Or maybe you have your own battles that feel impossible. Maybe anxiety that won't go away, financial stress that just keeps mounting, or health issues that the doctors just can't seem to fix. It's bigger than our personal struggles. We feel powerless watching our communities deal with violence and divisive issues and despair. We have more resources and technology than any other generation in history, and yet we feel more hopeless than ever. And the question is why? And I think that's because we're fighting battles that we can't win with weapons that don't work. And that's exactly why we're starting this 4-week series today called Not Today, Satan. So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about something that is a regular part of following Jesus. Engaging in spiritual battles. Now, before you go thinking, oh, this is going to be weird and over the top, let me just tell you what we believe here at the Table Church. We believe that Jesus has already won the battle. End of discussion. He overcame sin and the grave, and Christ gives us his authority to resist and overcome the enemy's work in our lives and the lives of others. So here's the thing. This isn't about being spooky or dramatic. This is about living what we call a naturally supernatural lifestyle, where spiritual warfare and spiritual victory are normal parts of following Jesus. And so for over the next 4 weeks, we're going to learn how to focus on the victory of Christ and live in the victory through the scriptural means that God has given us. So today, we're going to be reading out of Mark chapter 1, verse 21 through 28. So go ahead and grab your Bibles this morning. Turn there with me, open it up on your phone, or just follow along on the screen. Let's open in prayer this morning. God, we thank you for your word. God, we thank you for your son Jesus, who has given us life. God, we pray that you will speak into our hearts this morning. In your mighty name. Everybody said amen. So Mark 1, verses 21 through 28, this is where we see Jesus demonstrate a kind of authority that's going to change everything here. But before we see Jesus' authority in action, let's be honest about why we really even need this authority. Let's face it, we all get to a place in our life where we feel like the devil is beating us down, right? We're losing the battle. This usually happens when we make a step towards Christ, right? The moment you start getting serious about following Jesus, it feels like everything in your life just falls apart. You decide to get your finances in order only to have this sudden, unexpected expense. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You commit to working on your marriage only to find that there are more fights that are happening. You start praying more consistently and you're doing the prayer walks only to find that your life is just getting more and more chaotic, not less. People feel powerless against spiritual darkness and opposition in their lives. What they need to know is the real authority that they can overcome what feels overwhelming, what can feel uncontrollable, and that's through Christ. And the problem here is that the battles that we face are real, we just don't know how to fight them. And we want to understand how to fight them. The problem is that we try to solve spiritual problems with natural solutions. We fight depression with positive thinking and broken relationships with better communication skills and financial stress with budgeting apps. But how we win these battles is through understanding Christ's authority and the spiritual tools that he has given us. And through him, we live naturally supernatural lifestyles. These are lifestyles where spiritual warfare and spiritual victory are normal parts of following Jesus. And the question is not whether you'll face a spiritual opposition. The question is, do you know who has ultimate authority when the battle gets intense? So in Mark chapter 1, verse 21 through 28, we start to see where Jesus has now chosen his first disciples. He now enters into Capernaum to teach, and this is really early in his ministry. He's showing at this point his authority, not just teaching, but over all the spiritual forces. See, Jesus could have done this anywhere, but he chooses the synagogue on the Sabbath. And this is like going to the most religious place at the most religious time and saying, hey, watch this. He's not hiding his power. He's not being subtle about it. He is making a very public statement about who he is and what kind of authority he really has. His disciples that he chose, they're sitting here watching. The religious crowd is there, they're watching. And Jesus is about to blow everyone's mind in this moment and show them what real authority looks like. We start in verse 21, and it says, Jesus and his companions went to the town of Capernaum. When the Sabbath day came, he went to the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching, for he taught with real authority, quite unlike the teachers of religious law. Okay, so picture this. The most sacred setting possible. The synagogue on the Sabbath day, this isn't some private moment. This is what the Sabbath day was created for, right? Jesus is going public with his authority. The people's reaction here is what you need to pay attention to. It's immediate amazement. Why? Because Jesus taught with real authority. This was completely not what they were used to hearing, right? The religious teachers of that day would quote other teachers, but Jesus spoke like he actually knew what he was talking about. His authority was real. It wasn't borrowed. It wasn't learned. It was his own authority. And we continue in verse 23. It says, suddenly, a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "Why are you interfering with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." And boom, the spiritual realm immediately responds here. And it responds to Jesus' presence. The moment that Jesus starts showing his authority, the evil spirit freaks out and it starts talking. Now, notice what the demon says. It's both recognizing Jesus and it's also panicking at the same time. It says, "Why are you messing with us? Are you here to destroy us?" And here's what's crazy. The evil spirit knows exactly who Jesus is, and he calls him the Holy One of God, even when the people around are still trying to figure out who Jesus is. See, spiritual darkness, it recognizes real spiritual authority, even when we as humans are slower to figure this out. We continue in verse 25. But Jesus reprimanded him. "Be quiet, come out of the man," he ordered. And at that, the evil spirit screamed, threw the man into a convulsion, and then came out of him. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Jesus does this deliverance on the Sabbath, which later becomes this big controversy to the religious leaders, but notice nobody is having a problem with it here. His commands are super simple. They're direct. No long ritual, no special formula, no dramatic show. Just be quiet and come out. And the demon obeys. Sure, there's some struggle that you see here, right? The screaming and the convulsions, but the outcome was never in question. Jesus' authority is immediate and it is absolute. The spiritual realm has no choice but to obey what Jesus says. Continuing in verse 27, it says, amazement gripped the entire crowd. They began to discuss what had happened. "What sort of new teaching is this?" they asked excitedly. "It has such authority. Even evil spirits obey his orders." The news about Jesus spread quickly throughout the entire region of Galilee. So the people here, they are blown away by what they've just witnessed. They connect Jesus' teaching with his power over evil spirits. And they ask, what kind of teaching is this? They recognize that this is something that they have never seen before. And they just can't keep quiet about it. The news here, it spreads fast throughout the whole region. Because when people see real authority and they see this in action, they can't help but to share this. And so the news spreads. And so this passage shows us that Jesus' authority is unlike anything the world has ever seen. It's not learned from books or borrowed, but it's the real thing. When Jesus speaks, both the natural and the supernatural world listen. demons recognize who he is immediately. His authority doesn't need fancy rituals, just a simple command brings immediate results. This shows us also how we should respond to Jesus' authority. See, the people could tell the difference between human teaching and the real deal. They were amazed and they connected his teaching authority with his power over the spiritual forces. And when they see this, they cannot keep quiet about it. Amazement should lead us to worship, and worship should lead us to telling others. The passage also starts to pull back the curtain on what's really going on in the spiritual realm. The spiritual world is real and it responds immediately to Jesus' presence. Demons know exactly who Jesus is, make no mistake. Spiritual battles don't need to be complicated rituals or long drawn-out processes. Jesus' simple command brings immediate victory. There might be some struggle in the process, but again, the outcome is never in doubt when Jesus is in charge. This is the same authority that is available to believers who are facing spiritual opposition in their lives. And that gives me hope, because that same power is available to me. So, what does this mean for us when we're facing our own spiritual battles? The first thing we have to do is do exactly what the people in the synagogue did. And we have to recognize Jesus' unparalleled authority. The people immediately noticed that Jesus taught differently than anyone that they had ever heard. This wasn't borrowed or learned authority. It was the real thing, and it was divine authority. Even the demons recognized who he was, and they said, "You are the Holy One of God." And when you're in a spiritual battle, the first step is to recognize whose authority is ultimate in your life. We have to stop trying to fight battles with our human authority. Our willpower, our positive thinking, our self-help, they have their place, but we need to recognize that Jesus has the real authority that we need. It's not found in ourselves. But here's the thing, that's not enough to just recognize his authority. We have to learn to rely on Jesus' authority in our spiritual battles. So look at what happened in the synagogue. The demon had no choice but to obey Jesus' simple command. No ritual, no formula, no lengthy process. Again, just be quiet and come out. The spiritual realm has to submit to Jesus' authority. When we rely on his authority, we're not fighting alone in our own strength. Right? So in your own battles with fear and addiction and depression, broken relationships, whatever that might be, call on Jesus' authority. And that same power that made the demons tremble is available to you and I. And here's what I love about the people's reaction. When they witnessed Jesus' authority, they didn't just analyze it and discuss it. They had to respond with amazement and worship. It says they were all amazed and they asked, "What type of teaching is this?" They connected his teaching authority with his demonstration of power. Amazement leads to worship, recognizing who Jesus really is. You know, this really, it reminded me of this thing that happened a couple of years ago called a solar eclipse. I took a video of it where we were at the time. It was just kind of like you dimmed the lights maybe by like 10%, And so it really was not a great experience for us. And so I jumped online like everybody else does, and I watched people's reactions from the path of totality. And for 2 minutes, grown adults are gasping about this. They're crying. Scientists who understood exactly what was going on were just as amazed as kids seeing it for the first time. And that was because knowledge didn't diminish the wonder. It increased it. And that's what has to happen when we truly see Jesus' authority. We don't just think, that was some interesting theology. We're moved to amazement and worship. So don't just seek Jesus for what he can do. Seek him for who he is. And let his authority lead you into a deeper worship. Finally, I want us to notice what happens next. The people couldn't help but to be quiet about what they had seen, right? They had to tell somebody, and it says his fame spread immediately throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. Here's the thing. When you experience Jesus' authority, you become a witness. And you can't help but to report what you've witnessed. I want you to know that your testimony of his power encourages others who are facing their own battles in their own lives. So share what Jesus has done in your life. Your story of authority becomes real and tangible hope for people who are feeling powerless. See, when we realize Jesus' authority, our focus shifts from problems to praise. So here's the answer to feeling powerless against spiritual darkness and oppression. Jesus' authority over spiritual darkness means that we don't have to live in fear or powerlessness. His victory becomes our victory. When we recognize and we submit to his authority, we see victory in our own lives. Remember what we discussed in Mark chapter 1. It says, when Jesus showed up at the synagogue, everything changed. People went from being impressed by teaching to being amazed by the authority. The demon went from operating freely to being silenced and expelled. The crowd went from being passive listeners to active witnesses spreading the news. Why? It's because real authority changes everything. The enemy wants you to feel like you're losing, especially after you take steps toward Christ. But here's the truth. When you recognize Jesus' authority and you rely on his power, you respond with worship, and you report what he's done, you shift from fighting in your own strength to operating in his victory. The battle is real here, but the outcome is certain when you know who has ultimate authority. And this is how we get to live naturally supernatural lifestyles. It's not about working up your faith or trying harder. It's about recognizing the same Jesus who made the demons tremble over 2,000 years ago is the same Jesus who has authority over your battles today. And when we realize Jesus' authority, our focus shifts from problems to praise. Let me tell you what this looks like in real life. So a few years ago, I was a youth pastor, and we were planning our annual youth camp, and this was built completely from the ground up. And it's 1 a.m. the night, at this point, the day of the camp, right? I'm getting some things done at the church last minute, and I go to leave, and I put the key in the church van that I had just driven a couple of hours earlier, and I turned it over, and nothing. Lights are working, everything's working, nothing, no starter, no nothing. I put it in neutral like they teach you and let it roll, nothing, right? It's dead. Everything I try It's just dead. I call a cab. I wait 45 minutes. Cab never shows. So I decided to walk the 3.5 miles home. My anxiety at this point is completely through the roof. We have less than 7 hours before this camp starts, and everything I feel is just falling apart. That's when it hit me. I was trying to do the entire thing in my own hands. I was trying to carry this whole burden and this load on my shoulders. But it was only Jesus who was going to be able to meet those students in the place that they needed met the most. And so at 3 a.m., during this long walk home, I called on Jesus. The moment that I did, there was an immediate relief that rushed over my body. The weight of the camp wasn't on my shoulders anymore. It was in his hands. And I'll tell you what, I probably looked completely crazy walking down the highway with my hands raised, singing worship and praising Jesus for what he was going to do that day. I got home at 4:30 in the morning because I am not an athlete. I slept better in that hour and a half than I had in weeks. And here's the thing, the next morning, I shared what had happened with our team. And every single one of those team members had had the same stories. The enemy had been trying to convince us that we were powerless, but everything changed when we recognized who had the real authority. And let me tell you this, that week, Jesus showed up in so much power for those students. The van started every day. It was when we focused on his authority and gave it to him. And that's what it means, knowing that when we realize Jesus' authority, our focus shifts from problems to praise.